The Simulation Room Overclock mode is now out in beta. In this challenge, you can freely toggle different difficulty modifiers to make the run harder, but also get some sweet additional rewards. Today, I'm going to do a brief overview on this new mode, including a tier list of sorts of how easy each modifier will be, some general advice, and how to approach this mode at the current rotation, as well as showcasing my successful run at core ratio 25, which is the highest difficulty modifier where the rewards max out. As it's not fully released, any information in this video is subject to change, which is why I do want to state that this is not an in-depth guide on the new mode, as I don't know how accurate the info will be, and I'd rather not put effort into research that's just going to be outdated later. Without any delays, my name is Nikke, and let's find out what Ank's new torture regime has to offer. The current beta version of Overclock mode will run for 2 weeks. It will be unlocked after beating Section C of Stage 5, which is the previous hardest difficulty. Overclock will only last for one section, so you don't have to go through all 3. Everything with selecting buffs and how the levels go are the same as regular sim room with 7 levels, and you just have to fight one boss at the end. For the moment, the rewards can only be claimed once during these 2 weeks, so there's no need to be bashing your head against the wall daily to get those perfect runs. Let's go over the mechanics. You can select many modifiers that will give you additional ratio points, located at the top left. The more and difficult ones selected, the harder the run becomes, but also the greater the rewards. By default, the mode will start in ratio 1, which just enables a function to lock any units past level 400 to 400. It will not set your units' levels to 400 if you're below that though. Not really a debuff, just a rule of how the mode works. From there, you can select one modifier from each row. So for the next one here that buffs Rapture's attack power, you can only select the first one, which will increase core ratio by 1, or the second column, which increases ratio by 2, and so on. But you can see that each column will also increase the severity of the debuff, maxing out at plus 30% attack damage for enemies. Scrolling down, you can see that certain modifiers are only available in certain columns. So this one that spawns healing bots will only offer you plus 2 or plus 3 ratio, depending on the tier. There's a lot of options here, so you can pick and choose modifiers that you think you can counter by running the correct teams. It's kind of like Hades' heat system, so you can be a bit strategic about which ones to activate. While you can activate all of them, the rewards will max out at ratio 25, so there's no point of going higher unless you just want to flex. So I'm going to be ranking each modifier in this overclock rotation in one of 4 tiers. It's either a no-go, meaning picking this option will severely limit the way you play or will make the run extremely difficult. Wait and see, meaning the option may seem hard now, but may also become easier as more characters are released into the game. A challenge, meaning the modifier will pose a challenge but is doable. Or freebie, meaning an option is just free ratio points, as it probably won't impact you much at all. For the enemy attack up row, I'm giving this one a freebie. If you're used to doing hard mode campaign, then you're probably used to being one-shotted left and right. Even during my successful run, any runs that I had to reset were 95% where I got one-shotted by an exploder or a laser. I would say this one is easier to max out than some other mods, so you're good to go there. The next row is enemy defense up. I didn't pick this on my winning run, but looking back, I really should have. This is a freebie as well. And you can thank how damage is calculated in this game. I originally thought it worked differently since Simroom doesn't quite follow the same rules from other modes, but even when maxed out, it barely changes anything regarding how much damage it dishes out. So at least for this rotation, enemy defense up is another easy one. Though I will warn you that you may run into some trouble if you combine this with the next row. Enemy health up. This one I'm gonna put as a challenge. You can personally set this to only the first tier. I think it won't affect much at all. However, as I said before, since enemy health up is a more severe debuff than defense up, you may run into some trouble if you combine the two together. So I would just personally not max out both of them. The next modifier will remove any stat bonuses that comes from leveling up a Nikke's bond. This is actually worse for whales because if you have like a super invested Scarlet or Modernia with bond level 40, then this one's gonna hit you a lot harder versus a free-to-play who only has it at core 0 or 1 anyways. So quite interesting here. I'm gonna put this one as a challenge because I actually did run this on my run. I only had a core level 0 edgy Scarlet, so it didn't really matter to me all that much. But again, if you have a hyper-invested DPS, then this is going to hit you a lot harder. Next one is no recycling room stat upgrades. This is mainly going to be a hit to your health points, and I would definitely put this as a challenge as well. I actually did turn this on in my run too, but on an invested account, that extra health that comes from your recycling room is again going to make quite a big difference, and it's going to matter here and there in your runs. Aggressive tactics. Every level selection will have difficult levels and less chance for a non-battle option. I will put this one as a challenge as well. The only thing is that you can skip certain stages in the mode if you get like a random choice prompt for an ICU, which just saves you time as well as your sanity. I generally don't find sim room buffs to be that useful, but if you have the patience to plan out every single level, then by all means I've seen some people having some success with this one as well. The timer. Easiest freebie I've ever seen. In this mode, you either win or you die. If you're meeting the DPS check, you should be finishing up the level in a suitable amount of time anyways. Because if you're not, well, you're probably just gonna get trickled down by the enemy and just die from there anyways. So this, in my opinion, is an easy +4 ratio points. Next one is pretty big. You cannot run Type 1 SMG users. Let's run through all the most impactful characters that you can't select. We have Leader. Oh wait, that's it. Nah, I'm just kidding. There's also Volume and Miranda that are affected, and who can forget about Soldier OW? This mod basically bans Leader from your party. Depending on your roster, this can be a pretty big blow. I'm putting this mod specifically in Wait and See, as I have seen comps from other players managed without Leader, but Leader is kind of like a catch-all unit. She is extremely hard to pass up in your team. The second tier of this modifier is that Type 1 units' bursts are locked to 40 seconds, and CDR cannot affect them. This one I'm giving the no-go. This mod will severely limit your team building options, as you will be forced to run 2 Type 1 units, and the most impactful buff in the game cannot affect them. This will slow down your burst rotations and cause you to lose a lot of damage. Though something interesting is that certain Nikkes like Anne and Rapunzel have 60-second cooldowns. So they're actually getting buffed by this mod. Just want to put that out there. The next one is a ban on Type 2 AR users. Again, I'm going to put this one in the Wait and See category. Let's take a look at who this really affects. The main candidates here being Blanc and Summer Helm, meaning this is essentially a bunnies ban. If you combine this with the previous Leader ban, then it almost seems very particular of what they were trying to do. However, the Tiga support core does not seem to be affected, and I have seen people having some success with those two as well. The bunnies, at least in my opinion, is another big blow, as they're both win code and can kinda contribute to your damage output here. But again, this really depends on what roster you have. For the second tier, Type 2 units will have a burst cooldown of 40 seconds. Again, this is a no-go. Same reason as the previous, it will severely limit your team comps. The next one is that all enemies will turn into Iron Code. This one is a freebie. There's no elemental disadvantage. The code of the enemy only matters for which DPS you run to counter it if you choose to do so at all. Edgy Scarlet is an MVP for this overclock rotation, as she is the sole win code DPS that's very solid. But I've also seen people brute forcing it with Red Hood and Modernia as well. So this one is a free point. The next tier is that only weak element can hurt the target. This one I'm giving the no-go. It will only affect targets with a yellow bubble, but from what I saw, it only affects the boss, but locking out a big chunk of the entire roster's DPS units is kind of a big deal. This means only win code Nikkes can deal damage to the boss. This may get easier as the game progresses and we get a more varied roster, but for this rotation specifically, you're not gonna have a good time. Next one will spawn exploders. This one I'm giving the challenge tier. If the exploder goes off and you're not in cover, it will almost certainly instantly knock out one of your units. When everything gets hectic, sometimes it's hard to see which one is the exploder and know who to prioritize. If you can take them out in time, this one won't pose too much of an issue. The second tier is that exploders can only be damaged by the weak element, so again, wind. I'm giving this one the no-go, as it will limit your ability to hurt it, meaning one of the best AoE units like Modernia will not be able to affect them at all. And since the consequence of letting one live is extremely severe, again, you're just not gonna have a good time with it. The next one will spawn a robot that will buff enemies' health. This one I'm giving the freebie. If you let it live and it heals once or twice, it's not the end of the world. It just takes slightly longer to get rid of. It's nothing you can't do. But the second tier I'm going to put in Wait and See. The healing is going to be a bit more annoying, that you can't target it unless you have win code. I was really stuck on which rating to give this one. Now that I think about it again, once the roster expands, you have more tools at your disposal to deal with the healing bot. Since if you don't take it out quick enough, It can quickly snowball, heal more enemies, which just cycles again and makes it harder to target. The next modifier will cause a Mother Whale to appear at some point during a level and spawn 3 cancel rings. If you fail it, Mother Whale will do an AoE attack that is an instant KO if you don't have a shield or cover. This one I'm also putting down as a challenge. I actually turned this one on during my playthrough. Mother Whale is water code, but since you're worrying about countering the iron code enemies with wind allies, you're probably not going to run any electric code Nikkes to have an easier time here. I found that the cancel rings are quite doable if they appear during full burst, but pretty hard if you're not. There were a couple times where I intentionally gave up the rings to focus on DPSing down the boss just to clear the level, so it can create some kind of challenge of testing you what to prioritize, though I do want to state that it is quite doable. And lastly, relevant personnel, which instead of an ICU or spec up choice before the final boss stage, you will get a challenge stage instead. Clearing it will grant you with an epic rarity buff. Again, I'm gonna put this one in challenge. I enabled this one too during my run. It took quite a lot of retries, but once I got the level flow down, I was able to win out at the end. Generally, if you had enough sustainability through heals, you should be well prepared enough to handle it. Alright, so now let's go through some general advice on tackling this mode. It's gonna be different for everyone as we all have different rosters. You can still stack legacy buffs from normal sim room if you want an extra leg up. If at any point things are not looking too good, you can just quit out of the level. It will still say operation failed, but it will not actually delete your team. You can just retry using the same team or use a different one. However, your current team will be deleted and be out of action if the level ends with the timer running out or you got team wiped. So just retry if you want to have another go before everyone goes down. The difficulty is quite gradual up until ratio 20 or so, but starts to ramp up after that, as you start to run out of mods to choose from. If you didn't select aggressive tactics, you can also select the non-battle options to skip some of the levels. And lastly, I'm gonna show the team and the run I used to clear ratio 25. For the team, I'm running the Bunnies, Leader, Edgy Scarlet, and Alice. If you're even attempting this, then I assume you're in the endgame and I don't need to explain why this team is so good. My synchro level is at 291, though I think if your level hovers at the 280 to 300 mark, then ratio 25 is doable, but it may take a while to get the successful run in. For the modifiers, I maxed out enemy attack. I didn't go for any defense or health debuffs, which looking back definitely was a mistake. I would personally also max out the max debuff for 3 ratio points. I also turned on both no bond and recycling bonuses, as my Scarlet was only Coral level 0, so I really wasn't missing out on much here. I will personally not turn on the recycling room debuffs, as the HP bonuses are quite nice. Aggressive tactics, I turned this one off. I just didn't want to deal with all the extra hard levels, mainly to shave down on the runtime and just save myself a headache. The timer is maxed out, I don't need to explain this. I didn't enable any of the team restrictions, so I could run Leader and the Bunnies. Iron Code enemies are turned on, Exploder and Healer bots turned on but only the first tier, and this did cause me some headache as most of my wipes were from those exploding things. But I still managed to come out on top. Both Mother Whale and relevant personnel were turned on. I do think they are challenging mods but are doable if you're committed. So I just used this team for the entire run, but you can honestly use Modernia for the main stages and switch to Alice for the boss. But generally speaking, any meta team will perform quite well here. I've also seen people running Red Hood with the Tiga comp and selecting the no bunnies option, which is also valid. From what I've seen, there are people that are experimenting with different mods and still being able to find success. So the mode is not as one-dimensional as I originally thought it would. The relevant personnel level cost the most amount of resets. There were just a lot of things to juggle on the screen, from prioritizing the exploders to handling the Mother Whale cancel rings. I even got pretty lucky that my team didn't wipe at one point, but I eventually did win at the end. Facing the final boss, I got Heavy Metal, which I believe doesn't appear in the normal sim room. Again, the main hurdle here was juggling between prioritizing enemies and completing the cancel rings, as I couldn't afford to let Mother Whale get rid of my cover. Once you retry it a couple times, you'll start to get a feel of how the level is gonna go. I also found that the boss parts are really hard if not impossible to take out, so I would personally just aim for the core if you can. So my overall thoughts is that you shouldn't feel too forced to do it. Just think of it as an additional challenge on top. The goal of a gacha game is to never alienate casual players, as gacha games are really just meant to appeal to a wider audience. Because back when I was still making Genshin content, the one type of player I hated the most were players telling others to get good. Everyone has a different roster, everyone plays at different paces, and it's clear that this mode will only emphasize the importance of meta characters even more. But to be fair, a lot of the player base don't even bother with raid content, so only the sweaty players like myself will care about this new mode. I am overall interested to see where the Overclock room goes from here, and I'm excited to see how far they can design the modifiers, as some of them are quite creative if not deliberate. Enjoy the extra rewards for these 2 weeks if you can claim them, and let me know which team and what level you were when you managed to conquer Core Ratio 25. And as always, thank you for watching and have fun with the game.